Zionism is an innately genocidal, ethno-nationalist ideology. It aims to create an exclusive, ethnic Jewish society that gives special privileges to Jews in a place in which there already were, and still are, millions of non-Jews. This necessitates genocide, as the only way to achieve this goal is to get rid of a sufficient number of those who were there before to make Jews at least a majority, and thus make it possible to eliminate the previous society and replace it with this new one. This is textbook genocide in both intent and practice. It is thus innate to Zionism. And this is true whether they are a Zionist that wants all of Palestine, or they are a Zionist who is willing to settle for the so-called two-state solution, where they do this to only half of the land that they have usurped. Taking half of a land and eliminating the previous society and as many of the previous inhabitants as you can from it, so that you can have an ethnic supremacist state there, is still genocide. That's why the Genocide Convention goes to pains to repeatedly specify that it is still genocide if it's done in part. Now you might be thinking, based on my description there, that this sounds quite a bit like Nazism. After all, the Nazis wanted to kill or enslave everyone they did not consider to be a part of their ethnic in-group all across Eastern Europe, and build a sprawling Aryan society on the ruins of the societies that they genocided. And you'd be right, because these two ideologies are very similar at their core. The only reason that Zionism does not, and probably could not, rise to the scale of depravity that Nazism did is merely because its circumstances are very different. The Nazis were much more numerous, with much more territory and resources at their disposal, and they consider themselves to be beholden to no one. The Zionists know that this is not the case for them. They are smaller, weaker, totally dependent on international support to even exist, and are additionally now in a different time where moral standards have shifted. So they need to be much more careful with their rhetoric and with their actions, and make sure that their end goal, which is extremely similar to the Nazi end goal, is worked towards more discreetly. This is why liberal Zionism is a thing, but liberal Nazism wasn't. The Nazis had no need for such rhetorical strategies. The Zionists do. These are differences merely in practical circumstances, not goals. It just so happens that, more recently, the Zionists have been pushing the bounds of what they can get away with. And it's turned out that they can actually get away with doing far, far more than what they'd previously thought they could. I've talked about this 100 times over at this point, as have countless others. This is not anything novel anymore. And you'd think that with the Gaza genocide about to enter its second year, we wouldn't need to be touching on this again, as these facts about Zionism are more obvious than they ever have been before. And they were already pretty obvious. Apparently not though, because one of YouTube's biggest intellectuals seems to have avoided getting this memo. Contrapoints, who is one of the platform's most prominent purveyors of style over substance, has decided to release a statement complaining about people sharing the pleas of genocided Palestinians for assistance and to be heard. A bit too much, as she posits that this is potentially alienating to decent people. One must wonder how a Zionist can be a decent person, right? Given the inherently abhorrent character of the Zionist ideology. One must wonder what the problem is with alienating people who believe in ethnic supremacy and genocide. That seems like a good thing to do, actually. In her attempt to explain this, she falls flat, as you would expect, because she's trying to justify the unjustifiable. Her statement is the most generic liberal Zionist garbage I think I've ever seen. I, and probably many of you watching this, have already heard this crap a million times before, and it's so formulaic that I honestly have a tough time believing that it wasn't at least partly written by AI. She writes, "Many leftists feel betrayed because I haven't made a video on Palestine. Do they actually want a Contrapoints video about Palestine? Will they be happy if I get in the bath and pour milk on a mannequin of Benjamin Netanyahu? No. So firstly, I don't actually want you to make a video, and I think I speak for most people when I say that, because your videos are really bad, totally useless from a practical standpoint. The best way to describe them is nice gowns, and from everything we already knew about your opinion before you released this statement, we knew that it was terrible. Aside from that, you have actually made rushed out videos for individual issues before, like electing genocidal war criminal Joe Biden. So you feasibly could have made one, and its absence is just one more piece of evidence in the pile for how much you're totally unbothered by genocide. I don't think people are angry at you because you haven't made a video on this issue. They're angry because everything that you've said, including this very statement, indicates that you, at very best, don't care about it, and actually indicates quite strongly that in everything but your own meaningless claim that you don't support it are actually, if anything, working to further it. And this is all after you spent a whole decade, actually more than that, posturing as a leftist influencer. I have posted about Gaza constantly. When you have, it's been to downplay it, or to express annoyance at the fact that people want you to talk about it, or to tell people to vote for the very people who are doing the genocide. And in your downplaying of it, you also did some subtle denial of the actual death toll by not even acknowledging how much of a gross underestimate the official death toll is. So you're just a liar, and have quietly given money to Palestinian aid organizations. But I think what leftists really want is for me to join their chorus of anger. They sense some hesitation on my part and are judging me very harshly on my presumed opinions. I'd rather be judged on my actual opinions. So here they are. Chorus of anger. What the fuck does that mean? Is it supposed to be negative? What's wrong with being angry about genocide? That you would mention this speaks volumes in and of itself. Now let's get down to the actual statement rather than just the intro, okay? This is even worse than anything she's previously said online about the issue, by the way. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? Yes. Do I oppose it? Yes. Do I feel angry about it? Yes. I also feel a lot of other things. Okay, so Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. You oppose it and you apparently feel angry about it. You know, your country is assisting its regional proxy in carrying out the crime of crimes, the erasure of an entire people. Yet you won't make a video about it, and the best that you were able to do before this was a dismissive statement on Twitter every 2 months. Amazing. The rest of this statement makes it very clear that, if anything, she supports the genocide. The thing that her and others like her are doing now is saying, oh, it's a genocide, and of course I'm against it. And then going on to do everything possible to legitimize, normalize, and cover for the ideology and the state that is carrying it out. Doom. The week after October 7th, it was clear the mood among Israeli leaders and civilians was overwhelmingly kill or be killed, existential panic, and unstoppable lust for revenge. It reminded me of the US after 9/11. There was no reasoning or protesting them out of it. Actually, no, that's just what Israel is. It is an eliminationist, exclusionary, ethno-supremacist project. Blaming October 7th for Israelis doing what Israelis have always been doing or trying to do beforehand, just less intensely, just indicates a level of ignorance or intentional whitewashing that is on another level. This is not the result of a sudden, uncontrollable, irrational fear for revenge or a sudden fury in Israeli society. It is the result of the core of Zionist ideology. It's the only logical conclusion of it. As many Jews as possible, as few Palestinians as possible. They saw an opportunity to put that tenet into action at a faster speed than they were able to do before, and they took it. The idea that this is a sudden bloodlust rather than innate to their project is comical. What do you even think Gaza is in the first place? The very origin of Gaza is that it is a concentration camp where the survivors of the 1948 Nakba were mostly expelled to, one that they have variously periodically attacked, occupied, colonized, and blockaded endlessly the entire time since. It is designed entirely by Israel, intentionally, as a temporary holding place before they can manufacture the consent that they need to entirely eliminate or expel the Palestinians there. We are 2 years into this, and you still don't know this? You've learned nothing of the basics? Nor was it politically feasible for the US to withdraw aid to Israel on a time frame that would make a difference. It would have required replacing most of Congress and overturning decades of bipartisan strategy and diplomacy. Even in the best case scenario, it would have taken years. It's funny that her excuse for not only her total inaction, but her outright advocacy for the government carrying out the genocide, that is the previous Joe Biden government, is that taking action was not going to secure votes in Congress to vote on a boycott of Israel. No shit. Whoa, what a revelation. Shit, I totally thought the US Congress was going to vote to boycott Israel, Natalie. That's definitely what we all were hoping for. That's definitely what we were aiming for. No, it's not. That's why it's on you, it's on me, it's on everyone to pressure these motherfuckers and make them feel the pinch to the point that they either do something or face consequences for not doing it. You know, Ronald Reagan, for example, picked up the phone and told the Israeli Prime Minister, stop bombing Lebanon. And he fucking stopped. The US president can just do that. Israel is a dependent proxy. You can pressure them into doing that with enough action, but there wasn't enough action. That's the problem. Part of the reason why we couldn't do that is because of people like you who did nothing, who advocated for nothing. In fact, what did you do? You advocated against even trying to put any pressure on the genociders at the ballot box. You explained to everyone how they should vote blue no matter who. Vote for the genociders no matter who. No pressure, no demands, no expectations. Just vote for them and fucking pray. You've spent 10 fucking years making videos about leheckin' epic cat girl anarchists, and the best that you could think of here was, Well, looks like most people in Congress support Israel. I'm tapping out immediately. No! Bullshit! What you meant to say here is, I don't want things to change, but I'm afraid to admit that. It would ruin my career, it would ruin this entire image that I've concocted for myself. It would ruin my income stream. So I'm instead going to pretend that there was never a point in even trying, and that's why I didn't even try to encourage others to try, let alone try myself. So there was a sense of futility, but worse, misery. The leftist pro-Palestine movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to the genocide, but opposition to Zionism in general. That is, opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. And here they decided to draw the line separating decent people from genocidal fascists. It shrunk the coalition. I can't believe they not only opposed the genocide, but also the cause of the genocide, the thing that's doing the genocide, the people who are doing the genocide, Zionism and Zionists. Unbelievable, right? It's like being against the Holocaust and also Nazism. How could they possibly do that? You fucking moron! Do you mean to say that you are not entirely against the unacceptable, genocidal, ethno-nationalist ideology that Zionism is? The very perpetrator of this genocide that you claim to be against? That you claim makes you angry? Turns out you aren't actually against Nazism or ethnic supremacy at all. You think it's fine when it's Jews doing it. She clearly implies that she thinks that Zionists can be decent people. Not just decent people, but people who leftists should form coalitions with. So what kind of a statement is that exactly? Can Nazis be decent people? If you don't think that, then it makes absolutely no sense to think it for Zionists. Unless you consider Jews to be a special, magical group of people who get to have special, innate ethnic rights that other inferior human types don't. Zionist is a very broad category. Most Jews are Zionists. Who gives a fuck if most Jews are Zionists, Natalie? Most Germans were Nazis. Does that change anything about the equation for you? Do you think ethnic groups get to vote amongst themselves at whether or not they get to have their own little ethno-state at another people's expense? There is no valid reason for you to mention this unless you think that Jews do. This is pure Jewish exceptionalism. I have made a longer video on this where I explain this concept with specific examples in much more detail than I'm going to be able to go into here. So please, go and watch that if you want to actually learn something, rather than just see me shit on this idiot. Anyone who supports a two-state solution is a Zionist. It was politically infeasible. How the fuck did you just invoke the two-state solution as some sort of acceptable and achievable goal, and then immediately call other people's aims, goals, and political beliefs infeasible? The two-state solution has never been a thing. It has never been seriously on the table at all. It is a rhetorical tool, a means of control of the US and Israel, which they harp on so that they can frame the Palestinians themselves as the barrier to peace when they inevitably reject the US and Israeli offers to graciously allow Palestinians to have a tiny Bantustan with no actual sovereignty in exchange for them giving up all of their rights to their stolen property, to their stolen land, to their stolen country, to even having equal rights as human beings. To call other people's goal of ending genocide politically infeasible because they do not want to ally with people who adhere to a genocidal ideology which is presently doing genocide, and also invoke the two-state solution as your example of feasible and acceptable. What the fuck are you talking about? It seems that when you try to deal with actual real-world problems of actual importance, the total lack of substance to your usually entirely abstract wankery is laid bare. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. This is Ethan Klein level analysis, and that's why Ethan Klein himself has been sharing this gleefully. What is the pathway that takes us from the present situation to the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish state? I don't see how this could happen without either a total internal collapse of Israeli society or else, nuclear war. As usual, leftists have championed a doomed cause. Your own idea of the only possible viable pathway is waiting for the US Congress to vote for it to happen. I don't think you have any right to pose questions like this, as if they are unanswerable, when you have literally never even tried to answer them yourself, and you have in fact actively insulated yourself from any sort of engagement with the people who do have answers to them. Like me, I've invited you to talk to me live, You have ignored it. Many others have done the same. I know creators much bigger than me have invited you to talk about these things. You never allow yourself to be exposed to any scrutiny. You act like just because you can't think of it, that's the end of the discussion. And you act like just because seriously worthy political goals, achieving actual real change that greatly benefits human beings, takes time, effort, and sacrifice, they should not at all be pursued. If you had your way, South Africa would still be under apartheid. I mean, after all, back in the 1960s, it looked like the whites would rather burn everything down than give it up. It took decades and decades and decades of work, sacrifice, fight to end it. And Natalie Wynn would tell you that they shouldn't have ever gotten started, actually. It was a doomed cause. Best to instead normalize and legitimize ethno-nationalist settler colonial genocide. Allow it to solidify itself until the point that it becomes truly impossible to topple, so that it can garner the support that it needs to fully eliminate the Palestinians. Give the genociders what they want. That is Natalie Wynn's message. But look, this isn't actually her message, is it? She doesn't really believe what she's saying here. I see through this immediately. You should see through this shit instantly as well. This is liberal Zionism par excellence. It's being too much of a coward to admit what you really believe, because it's too socially unacceptable to do so. What she really thinks is that having a Jewish ethno-state in Palestine is totally acceptable. She supports it. That's why she's trying to normalize its existence here, slyly pretending that it is a strategic disagreement, that she's only against anti-Zionism because it's practically infeasible, rather than her actually just being totally fine with it. That's why she let it slip that she thinks Zionists can be decent people. She fundamentally believes in Jewish supremacism. She thinks that Jews should have special ethnic rights to do things that would usually be impermissible, like form settler colonial ethno-states at the expense of everyone else there. It introduced dangerous ambiguities. The vagueness of Zionism as a political Satan enables all kinds of rhetorical abuses. On the one hand, right-wing Israelis hold up all anti-Zionist protests as existentially threatening and inherently anti-Semitic. Who gives a fuck what Zionists say? They're genocidal ethno-nationalists. Of course they're going to say insane stuff about those who oppose them. The Nazis said that any Jewish resistance to them was proof of the Jewish anti-German conspiracy. Proof that Jews wanted to wipe out Germans, actually. Did that delegitimize Jewish resistance for you? What the fuck kind of talking points are these? The very fact that you see these things as not comparable, as different, just because of which ethnic group we're talking about, proves that you're a Jewish supremacist. On the other hand, there is a long history of anti-Semites using the term Zionists in deliberately equivocal ways. Zog, etc. Anti-Semites are happy for the opportunity to misappropriate the now popular anti-Zionist label to legitimize their agenda, and many people are not informed enough about anti-Semitism to recognize when this is happening. These problems are mutually reinforcing. Wow, so Contrapoints is very concerned with anti-Semitic words, isn't she? More concerned than she is with dead Palestinian babies. You know, real-life dead babies? Okay, whatever. Now, people on Twitter saying Zog. That's serious. That is what concerns her. I'm going to say something here that's entirely true, but it's going to make you squirm anyway. Jews are not being massacred for being Jews. Jews are not being raped for being Jews. Jews are not being expelled for being Jews. No one is holding protests advocating for their right to rape Jews. However, you know what is actually happening right now in the real world? Not just mean words on Twitter. It's happening right here, in this place. Jews are massacring other people for not being Jews. Jews are raping other people for not being Jews. Jews are expelling other people for not being Jews. Jews are protesting for their right to rape non-Jews. This is the actual reality of the situation right now in Palestine. Why the fuck are you talking about anti-Semitism on the internet given this? 1 million anti-Semitic posts on Twitter are not equal to even one dead Palestinian, Natalie. But for you, actually, those posts are clips not just that one dead Palestinian, but the hundreds of thousands of them who have been murdered by Jewish supremacists for not being Jewish. To even mention anti-Semitism in the context of Israel-Palestine, which is a situation where an overt and proud Jewish supremacist settler colonial project is working to eliminate an entire other people because they are not Jewish, is and can only ever be a tactic to legitimize said Jewish supremacist colonial project. If someone was complaining about anti-German sentiment during the Holocaust, while simultaneously lamenting that decent Nazis were being alienated by those who, as you're going to see Natalie say in a little bit, share too many photos of the horrors of the genocide of the Jews, there would only be one valid descriptor for that person. Nazi. And there is only one valid descriptor for Natalie Wynn, who is doing precisely that here with the Holocaust of our time. Nazi. And many people are not informed enough about anti-Semitism to recognize when this is happening. These problems are mutually reinforcing. These problems are also not even remotely on the same level of seriousness. So for you to even bring this up is extremely telling as to where your priorities are. They certainly don't seem to be with the massacred Palestinian babies. Dread. The online left has spent the last 20 months distributing hundreds of photos and videos of dead Palestinian children. The main effect of this has been to create a population of people in a constant state of blood-boiling rage with no consequential political outlet. What the hell do you even say to that part? She is complaining that we are spreading the evidence, testimonies, and final pleas for help of a people being genocided. The fact that we are sharing these people crying out for help with their last dying breaths is for her an inconvenience to complain about. She cares less about what these images depict than how this might cause people to become anti-Semitic. There is this scene from the TV show Andor, which I'm ashamed to have watched. It is a Star Wars show, and that is deeply embarrassing, where a genocide is depicted, and as the people are being genocided, they put out a final radio message pleading for help. What you're seeing happening in Gaza right now is that radio message. Every single day for what she said was 20 months here. Those videos, those posts on social media by the Palestinian people, collectively, those amount to their final plea. Contrapoints hears that plea, and she wants to change the channel. Actually, even worse, she thinks about how that plea might cause anti-imperial sentiment. What else is there to say? I fear this may be worse than useless. Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are conceptually not the same, but in practice, the way Israel is perceived does seep out into attitudes towards Jews in general. I don't think Jews who feel isolated and wary in the current atmosphere are simply hysterical or hallucinating. If you are Jewish and you feel isolated because a Jewish supremacist state is carrying out genocide, that can only be because you feel some sort of attachment to that state. And if you feel some sort of attachment to that state, that can only be because you feel some sort of innate ethnic ties to it and its project. You feel ethnic solidarity with other Jews on an ethnic basis. You have what are fundamentally fascist, race scientist politics. And in general, if you are a Zionist and you feel unsafe or harassed or whatever other negative sounding therapy speak term that's being weaponized this week in order to justify the most abhorrent white people shit imaginable, good. You support a genocidal ethno-nationalist project. I'm glad you're at least being made to feel slightly vulnerable as a result of that. Yes, there's communal trauma and hypervigilance. Yes, there's disingenuous right-wing ghouls dismissing and censoring all criticism of Israel on the pretext of fighting anti-Semitism. But there's also a valid fear of historical anti-Semitic patterns recurring, and that only gives power to the right-wing Zionist claim that only Israel can keep Jews safe. Historical patterns of anti-Semitism, as in tropes, conspiracies, are reoccurring. But not against Jews. Against Palestinians are actually being used, ironically, by Zionist Jews and their allies to do this, to enable this genocide. Why are you talking about, supposed anti-Semitism against Zionists carrying out a genocide and how this might make them feel unsafe, and not that, which is way more impactful? I have a whole video on this. You don't seem to be concerned with this at all, though. You seem to be concerned way more with the feelings of the people doing the fucking genocide and how they feel unsafe and victimized. Does this mean Israel should not be criticized and sanctioned? Absolutely not. I always find it revealing when people talk about how it's permissible to criticize Israel, because that terminology carries the implication that Israel is something that is merely flawed, that is worth salvaging or that can be salvaged. All we gotta do is point out its problems and engage in good faith criticism so that the Israelis can work to fix them. But let's imagine merely talking about critiquing Nazi Germany, as if it was possible for it to be merely reformed into something more acceptable. Zionism is an innately unacceptable project. You don't merely critique it, you denounce it, and you do what you can to work towards its non-existence. But it's something I don't want to risk contributing to, if not outweighed by tangible benefits, so I approach the issue cautiously. So the reason you don't talk about Gaza is just in case you contribute to anti-Semitism? This is no different to not talking about the Holocaust just in case you accidentally contribute to anti-German sentiment. What a crock of shit. Bitterness. Much of the online left spent all of 2024 single-mindedly focused on Palestine and the complicity of democratic politicians in sending aid to Israel. No, that is whitewashing. They do not merely send aid to Israel. They are part and parcel to this. They are in control of Israel. They can make Israel stop whenever they want. Israel is carrying out actions that they believe assist in their geopolitical goals in the Middle East. That's why they are supporting it. You are just lying here. This campaign had the following effects. 0 Palestinian lives were saved. Not one fewer bomb or bullet was fired by the IDF. What a disgusting joke of a person you are, Natalie. It may have slightly contributed to the re-election of Trump, guaranteeing that the US will put no diplomatic pressure on Netanyahu for at least 4 years, and making protests against Israel both much riskier and less effective. You're just lying. Joe Biden, who you supported, never put any pressure on Israel. Israel was totally unleashed during his term. If Israel has advanced to genocide more now, the reason why it's doing that is just because time has passed, not because of any meaningful difference in the different presidents' approach to the issue. Biden regime officials have literally come out and bragged about this. They're not exactly hiding it. They didn't put pressure on Israel, and they think it's good that they didn't. On top of that, the majority of the dead in Gaza died during Biden's presidency. You just can't help but lie, can you? Trump is also, incidentally, a menace to me and basically everyone I care about. A perfectly enlightened being would feel no bitterness about this, but I do. You. That's all you ever fucking cared about, isn't it? And if Trump is a menace to you and other Americans, then good, because just like Biden did, he's doing way worse to the rest of the world. But at least the fact that he is taking actions against you that Biden wasn't might spur Americans into actually doing something to inconvenience the US government. Because them just massacring hundreds of thousands of people sure didn't. That you say this now shows very plainly that you are mostly okay with what your country does to others, as long as things stay comfy for you at home. Trump makes things uncomfy. Now there's a problem. None of this is the fault of Palestinians, of course, who are overwhelmingly the victims here. I hope that someday American policy will shift in their favor, and I will continue to support that cause. This message makes it clear that you do not support that cause at all. Like, what do you support? Sitting there and hoping? Just fucking hoping? Thoughts and prayers? What you are seeing now is Zionism in both theory and practice. It's the logical end of its prescriptions. This is where it was always going to go. Like, do you have a brain? Can you put 2 and 2 together and think about the obvious implications of what it means to seek a state for only one ethnicity in a place with millions of people who are not of that ethnicity? What the fuck do you think Nazism was, if not exactly that? Just in its own different set of circumstances. How do you possibly look at this and not see the exact same thing as every other ethno-supremacist project, as every other ethno-nationalist ideology in history? Like the white supremacist ones that you've made 15 videos pretending to be against, remember those? I would think that it's because you know nothing about history, or really anything remotely related to the real world at all, as your videos deal purely in abstract, pseudo-intellectual uselessness. They are designed to posture as an intellectual rather than be one, with all of the real world responsibilities that such a role really entails. Contrapoints loved leftism, she loved talking about it, she loved posturing as a leftist, when it was to her little more than a subcultural thing, a virtue signal that could be discussed purely in the abstract. But now, people with a Nazi-like ideology are carrying out a real-life, overt, Nazi-like eliminationist campaign against an entire people. It's time to actually put the abstract into practice. It's time to put theory into practice and punch the Nazis, so to speak. But instead, what is she talking about? How much we need to cherish and respect them when their feelings are hurt because we post too many photos of the dead babies that their ideology is killing, and how we need to broaden our coalition to include the decent Nazis. Quite a disconnect from theory to practice, huh? But the thing here is, this is not at all the result of mere incompetence or stupidity on her part. This is not just her misanalyzing the situation. It's not her not understanding the facts enough and making an honest mistake based on incomplete information that she could be educated on and that she would then rectify. This is not a failure of her to see the ethnic supremacism inherent to Zionism. It's not her not seeing that it shares the same ideological traits of the Nazism that she has made many videos denouncing. It's actually just that she believes in it. It's actually just that she is a Zionist. It's actually just that she's a Jewish supremacist. What makes this abundantly clear is the substance of this statement. It is her angry about the fact that people talk about Gaza at all, and especially angry at the fact that they want her to talk about it. In her statement, she's not even complaining about actual real action. She's rather complaining about speech, and speech on the internet at that. She's angry that people are even hearing about what the USA and Israel are doing to these people. She's concerned way less with the pictures shared by massacred Palestinians pleading for help as they are being strangled to death than she is with the fact that people are seeing them. She expresses infinitely more worry in this statement about how those Palestinians pleading for help as they are fucking killed might offend the sensibilities of the impossibly privileged and coddled Jewish supremacists who are killing them than she ever has for their victims. Sure, human beings are being slaughtered in a genocide by the Jewish supremacist Zionist project. But what about how some shut-ins on X, the Everything app, are being anti-Semitic? How is it not an equal or more important issue that Groiper Hitler keeps saying Zog. What Contrapoints is saying here is the same liberal Zionist claptrap as always. That's why I think it's written by AI, at least partially. Center Zionist feelings, not the people being massacred by Zionists. This sort of conclusion can only ever be formed by a racist Jewish supremacist. And if your excuse is some variation of, but Jews are special, it's different for them, they can do things that others can't. You don't believe that, obviously. You don't think that just because Palestinians have been made into a historically oppressed group by these Zionists, that it's okay for them to go and eliminate them and form their own Palestinian ethno-state, do you? But you think that for Jews, it's clearly not based on circumstance, it's based on a belief in an ethnic supremacy, a belief in special ethnic rights. So I'm honestly flabbergasted that you can make arguments like, oh, but look, Jews are special in some or some other way. It's different for them. Thus, they can do things that others can't. And you can say that without realizing that you're just proving my point even further. You either apply the same standard to all groups, or you think certain groups are special and allowed to violate those standards. And Contrapoints does think that. Obviously, given that she thinks you can be a Zionist, an innately genocidal, ethno-nationalist, Jewish supremacist ideology, and also be a decent person that should be included in a leftist coalition, she's a Jewish supremacist. She and the not insignificant number of people who are like her definitely know this. They're just too afraid to fucking say it. And that is a great example, by the way, of what I talked about of the different circumstances between Nazism and Zionism. There's no real ideological difference, no real difference in the end goals, just in the circumstance. She feels that she cannot express her real beliefs openly, so she clouds them behind what she seems to think is enough layers of plausible deniability. But it's actually really fucking easy to see through. Funnily enough, that Zionists like her feel that they have to do this is actually an example of the fact that what me and many other anti-Zionists are doing is working. Contrary to what she's saying, the fact that she is so utterly fucking terrified of expressing her real beliefs shows that we are winning in at least some way. We are changing things way more than Contrapoints ever had, that is for certain. Her aim is to keep things how they are, genocide and all, and not change them. It really is that simple. So Contrapoints is a regressive force for evil. She is actively attempting to normalize and solidify a genocidal ethno-nationalist ideology. She's essentially doing entryism for Zionists into leftism by advocating for them being included and for them being decent people. She is attempting to ensure that the precarious position that Israel holds becomes more solidified in the future. She needs to stop us from correctly identifying what the problem is, Zionism, and who its adherents are, and she wants to convince people that they should accept Zionism in some form or another rather than fight it, because she wants it to continue and prosper. In short, Natalie Wynn is a Nazi. I say that 100% seriously, it's not hyperbole. She is a Nazi. A Nazi, but for Jews, is a Nazi nonetheless. It's incredibly funny, by the way, that Contrapoints talks about how leftists achieve nothing. They apparently have totally inactionable goals, when she is the poster child for achieving absolutely nothing. Well, aside from fattening her bank account, of course. Despite her connections and proximity to the most powerful people in American politics, despite her being profiled constantly in the mainstream imperialist media, being framed as some sort of de-radicalizing force, which has given her capacity to have actual, real, direct levels of influence on formal American politics that most can only dream of. Her own political project has, throughout her career, solely failed spectacularly, which is quite an impressive feat, quite an impressive level of incompetence, given that her own goals are incredibly unambitious, incredibly easy and simple to achieve. She does not seek change. She rather just wants to maintain one side of the status quo, the Democrats in the USA. She wants to keep them in power so they can ensure her own personal rights are protected as a white American trans woman. Everything else she's fine with. The imperialism, the mass murder, the genocide. In fact, if anything, such endeavors by the US benefit Americans of her social class, which is why she has absolutely never expressed any opposition to them until this sort of wishy-washy, fake, anti-genocide rhetoric that she's engaging in now. The fact that anything anti-imperialist at all has always been absent from her content should have clued you into the fact that she is a fascist a very long time ago. Because it did to me. I've known this for fucking ever. The fact that many of her former fans, who now see her for what she is, never noticed this, is pretty jarring, really. I hope that they now realize, going forward, that the people who are most negatively affected by Western politics, by the actions of Western governments, and by the willful malice of people like Natalie Wynn are not residents of the West themselves. They're not actually you, but rather the billions of people who are not even within your borders. So Contrapoints' own political project has failed to achieve its absurdly simple goal of just keeping things how they were. No change, nothing ambitious, nothing risky, just keep the Democrats in power so that I can be comfy. During her career, Donald fucking Trump, the biggest bumblefuck loser fascist ever, has won 2 elections, both times against Democratic Party candidates who she championed. There are way more fascists in the USA now who are way more emboldened now than they were when she was getting started. And this woman is supposedly the Nazi whisperer, but it looks like she really failed to successfully whisper to any Nazis. Well, aside from the Zionist ones, of course, she's pretty firmly aligned with them now, isn't she? She's a complete and utter failure. Her politics are a complete and utter failure. She is living proof of the practical inviability of her own ideology, of her own prescriptions, of the fact that if your comfort is built on the blood of billions of oppressed, then eventually your chickens are going to come home to roost, and you're going to be made to feel at least a slight fraction of the pain, of the dread, of the horror that you were indifferent to when your nation was inflicting it upon others, that there is not even a single hint of in your entire base of content. And the worst thing about this is that she's clearly seen this total failure of her ideology over the course of the last 10 years. Everything that I'm talking about, she knows all about, but she's so dumb, so unimaginative, and hides her intellectual sub-mediocrity under a veil of overproduction to such an extent that the best prescription that she can think of is to keep advocating for the exact same things that got her here, to the extent that she is actively deriding people who are actually trying to work towards something different that might take actual time, effort, and sacrifice to achieve. Especially that last part bothers her. She would never, for someone like her who is such an abject failure of a human being in every aspect, particularly intellectually and morally, to lecture others on what the acceptable and achievable bounds of politics are and should be, to tell them they need to give up and accept the decent Nazis who are presently massacring dozens of tiny little children every fucking day, is so disgusting. You are a Nazi, Natalie Wynn. The tides are turning and you will rightfully be swept away. The comfort that you have now will not last. Your viewer base will dwindle as the appetite for the sort of tripe that you make and the views that you espouse evaporates, and you are far too lazy to adapt. We will extend you as much empathy during your downfall as you did to the little babies massacred by the decent ideology of Zionism. I'd just like to say, hi Natalie, how you doing? For when I appear in 3 years' time, when you finally finish your next video, whining about the pushback you got for this, probably titled something like, I was cancelled for the 5th fucking time. By the way, what do you even do with your time? You literally make 1 video a year. This woman is not working. As a YouTuber, I can tell you that 100%. She doesn't work. I know how much work this stuff takes. Even with all the costumes and the scene setup and the editing, definitely does not take a year to make per video. It would be 2 or 3 months per video at most if she's working a normal 40-hour work week. And that's if she was doing it all alone. I could start and finish a video with the same level of work on the scripting and research side of things as what goes into her videos in a week or 2. And I don't have employees like she does. She's just not working. She's doing 2-hour work weeks on your Patreon dime while posting about the importance of Zionist feelings as Zionists commit genocide. I just want to make sure that all of you know that.